You have 72 hours to cut your grass, or we'll fine you $150 per day. That was the bright pink notice taped to my front door. Bold letters screaming from behind a strip of scotch tape that looked like it was applied with more passion than necessary. I blinked at it, still in my pajama pants, coffee mug in hand, completely unaware that my slightly overgrown lawn had become a matter of suburban emergency. I live in one of those meticulously planned communities where the houses are a little too similar and the neighbors wave a little too often. It's the kind of place where lawn stripes are practically a personality trait, and untrimmed hedges are considered an act of rebellion. I had moved here a few years ago for the peace and quiet, a decent backyard, a friendly dog, and no loud college kids throwing parties until 3 a.m. seemed like a fair trade for the soul-crushing tyranny of HOA rules. Or so I thought. I wasn't a troublemaker. I paid my dues on time, waved politely at the neighbors, and kept my trash bins out of sight. But apparently, letting my lawn grow a few inches during a busy work week had turned me into a local menace. I looked out over the offending grass, which had the audacity to sway gently in the breeze, like it was proud of itself. It wasn't even that tall. It gave off more of a charming meadow vibe than anything offensive. Still, I knew exactly who was behind the notice, even if her name wasn't signed on it. Karen, the woman who lived 2 houses down with a clipboard, a Bluetooth headset, and an intense love for bylaws. She was the type of person who took personal joy in monitoring lawn heights and measuring fence colors against approved swatches. At that moment, something shifted. I wasn't mad. Not exactly. But I did feel a rising sense of mischief curling around my morning coffee. If Karen wanted me to mow the lawn so badly, maybe it was time to get a little creative. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a force of suburban nature. The kind of woman who wielded her clipboard like a badge and walked the sidewalks like she owned the concrete beneath her sketchers. She had a blonde bob that never moved out of place, and sunglasses that she wore even when it rained, which somehow only added to the intimidation factor. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, but not in the friendly, let's bake cookies sort of way. She was the self-appointed guardian of order, the HOA's most zealous volunteer, and a woman who found genuine joy in catching people committing acts of lawn negligence. It was around noon that same day when I heard the unmistakable sound of her sandals slapping confidently against the pavement. I didn't even have to look out the window to know who it was. A moment later, the doorbell rang. 3 quick presses in a row, no hesitation, no patience. I opened the door to find her standing there with her usual expression, somewhere between mild disgust and smug satisfaction. She didn't bother with small talk. "Hello, just following up on the lawn situation," she said, already flipping through the stack of papers on her clipboard. "We've had several complaints. You should have received the notice this morning." Several complaints. I almost laughed. If by several she meant herself and her reflection, then sure. I nodded slowly, sipping my coffee. Yep, I saw the note. Pretty bold color choice. Karen didn't appreciate sarcasm. Her lips thinned as she pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward my yard. It's important that everyone upholds community standards. That's what keeps property values high and the neighborhood looking respectable. I looked at my yard again. It wasn't even bad. A little green, a little wild, but in a charming way, like it had personality. But Karen didn't like personality. She liked uniformity. She liked clean edges and silent rule following. She liked being the one who noticed when someone's recycling bin was an inch too close to the street. Before I could respond, she handed me a printed copy of the HOA's landscaping rules, highlighted, underlined, and tabbed with sticky notes. "You have 3 days," she repeated, already pivoting on her heel and marching off, clipboard clutched like a sword. I stood there in the doorway, watching her retreat like a general satisfied with a battle won. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just declared war, and I had an idea brewing. The first warning was annoying, but the second one felt like a personal attack. It showed up in my mailbox just 3 days after Karen's surprise visit, this time in a sealed envelope with the HOA logo printed across the top like a letter from the IRS. Inside was another bright-colored notice, this one a vibrant yellow, with language that was somehow both stern and condescending. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and possible committee review. Committee review. For grass. I wasn't running an underground casino. I just had a slightly rebellious yard. That evening, I logged into the community Facebook group out of pure curiosity, and there it was. A blurry photo of my front lawn, posted by none other than Karen herself. The caption read, "Sad to see some people in our community don't respect the guidelines we all agreed to uphold." There was no name, but everyone knew. The comments were a mix of fake concern and genuine entertainment. A few neighbors offered lawn service referrals. One posted a gif of goats chewing grass. I couldn't help but laugh. To make matters worse, I actually tried to mow the lawn the next day. I dragged out the old mower, filled it with gas, and made it exactly 5 steps before a dark cloud rolled in like it had been hired by Karen herself. The sky opened up, and within minutes, my yard looked like the set of a disaster movie. Mud, puddles, and blades of grass plastered against the sidewalk. I stood in the rain, soaked and defeated, while Karen peeked from behind her living room blinds like a hawk watching her prey slip. That night, I vented to a friend over the phone and joked, maybe I should just get some goats and let them handle it. There was a pause on the line, and then we both laughed. Hard. But later, lying in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling and replaying the idea. Goats. They'd eat the grass, make a statement, and give Karen an ulcer all at once. By morning, the joke wasn't so funny anymore. It felt possible. And with each sip of coffee, the idea took root like a stubborn weed. If they wanted the lawn trimmed, I'd make sure it was handled. I just wouldn't be the one doing the mowing. Finding goats wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. A few clicks on a local farm forum, a couple of messages exchanged, and suddenly I had an appointment to pick up 2 small goats from a family just outside of town. They had a little hobby farm and were downsizing. The goats were friendly, loved people, and most importantly, had a voracious appetite for grass. It felt like destiny. I showed up with a borrowed truck and a wire crate in the back, expecting the whole thing to feel absurd. But the moment I saw them, one white with patches of caramel brown, the other jet black with curious golden eyes, I knew I wasn't turning back. The farm kids had named them Chompers and Mowgli, and honestly, I couldn't have picked better names myself. They hopped into the crate like they knew they were on their way to greatness. Driving back into the neighborhood with 2 goats in the truck bed felt like a scene from a suburban rebellion movie. I passed Karen's house on purpose, slowing just enough to catch her expression. She was watering her hydrangeas. Her jaw visibly dropped. I gave her a little wave. The goats bleated on cue. It was perfect. Back home, I set them up in the backyard with a temporary enclosure and a little shelter made from an old patio umbrella and a kiddie pool flipped on its side. The moment they hit the grass, they went to work. No hesitation. Chompers started gnawing through the tallest patches like a lawnmower with teeth, and Mowgli trotted around inspecting the terrain like he was in charge of quality control. Within hours, they'd trimmed half the yard down to a respectable stubble, and they looked like they were having the time of their lives. The neighbors noticed immediately. Curtains twitched. Phones came out. I could hear the shutter clicks from across the fence. Kids came by to ask if they could pet the goats. One of them asked if they were magical. I said maybe. Someone shouted, This is the best thing to happen here since the ice cream truck came back. Karen, however, did not share the sentiment. I caught her pacing in her driveway, talking on her Bluetooth headset with the intensity of someone reporting a major federal crime. She kept looking over and shaking her head, like I had set loose a pack of wolves. To make matters even better, or worse, depending on your perspective, I put up a tiny wooden sign at the edge of my lawn that said, "Goat-operated lawn care, eco-friendly, HOA approved." It was meant to be funny, but I'm pretty sure it sent Karen straight into orbit. That night, I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching the goats chew peacefully under the setting sun. My lawn was getting trimmed, the neighborhood was buzzing, and for the first time in weeks, I was actually enjoying this little suburban circus. By the next morning, Karen was a woman on the verge. I heard her before I saw her, her sharp, purposeful footsteps clacking against my driveway like gunfire. The kind of walk that says someone didn't sleep well and wants the world to suffer for it. She stormed around the side of my house, not even bothering to knock, clutching a thick stack of HOA paperwork that looked like it had been color-coded and tabbed for legal battle. The goats were lounging near the flower bed, chewing lazily and completely unfazed by the brewing storm. "Livestock," Karen said, her voice tight with restrained fury. "You've brought livestock into a residential neighborhood. This is a violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the HOA Covenant Agreement. Page 32. I highlighted it." I took a sip of coffee, nodded thoughtfully and said, "They're pets, actually. Very friendly. Want to pet Mowgli? He knows his name." Karen recoiled like I'd offered her a live grenade. "Pets?" she scoffed. "Those are farm animals. You can't just rewrite biology to suit your laziness. This is not a petting zoo. This is a community." "I agree," I said calmly. "A community where people look out for each other, support creativity, and value eco-conscious choices. And these two are very green. Zero emissions, completely biodegradable." Her face turned an impressive shade of crimson. She flipped open her binder like a prosecuting attorney and started reading out regulations, citing noise ordinances, animal restrictions, and zoning codes. I let her go on for a good 2 minutes before holding up my hand and gently interrupting. "I actually spoke with a city official yesterday," I said, half truthfully. "As long as they're not causing a disturbance and they're registered as pets, there's nothing preventing me from keeping them. And before you ask, yes, they're vaccinated, and no, they don't produce excessive waste. I pick up after them. Just like a dog, only they mow while they poop. Efficient little workers." Karen's mouth opened and closed without sound. She wasn't used to pushback, especially the kind that came with well-prepared retorts. She tried a new angle. Sympathy. "The neighbors are uncomfortable. People have called me." "Really?" I said. "Because the Thompson kids just brought them baby carrots, and I saw Mrs. Lee take a selfie with chompers. They seem pretty comfortable." That was the final straw. She snapped the binder shut, pointed a trembling finger at me, and hissed, "This isn't over. I will escalate this to the board." "Great," I said, smiling. "I'll bring the goats to the meeting." She stormed off, muttering under her breath, her Bluetooth headset swinging wildly from one ear. The goats watched her leave, then went back to chewing the same patch of grass they'd been working on all morning. The irony was delicious. That evening I ordered 2 tiny vests online, bright orange with bold letters that read "Emotional Support Goat." I didn't need them, but I had a feeling they'd come in handy very, very soon. By the end of the week, the goats had gone from controversial lawn crew to minor celebrities. Word had spread quickly, thanks in part to Karen's increasingly dramatic attempts to rally the community against them. The more she protested, the more curious people became. One afternoon, I looked out and saw a group of kids kneeling by the fence, offering the goats apple slices and trying to teach them tricks. Mowgli learned to nudge a beach ball with his head. Chompers mostly ignored everyone and focused on eating as much as possible. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact with me before were suddenly stopping by to chat. Mr. Ramirez from across the street told me he hadn't laughed so hard in years. "I mean goats," he chuckled, shaking his head. "That's just genius." Even the mail carrier paused one day to snap a photo. "My daughter's obsessed with goats," she said. "She's going to love this." Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling in slow motion. She posted daily in the HOA Facebook group, each update more desperate than the last. "Wild animals roaming our streets. Potential danger to children. Do we really want livestock next to our manicured lawns?" But her outrage wasn't landing like she expected. Most of the replies were jokes, memes, or people asking for goat selfies. Someone even started a Team Mowgli fan thread with edited pictures of him wearing sunglasses and mowing lawns with lasers. I didn't post a thing. Didn't have to. The neighborhood had taken over the narrative for me. The ultimate blow came when I started a TikTok account, partly for fun, and partly to needle Karen without directly breaking any HOA guidelines. The account, at HOA Goats, featured short videos of the goats munching grass, headbutting yoga balls, and lounging under a patio umbrella with sunglasses perched on their heads. One clip with a dramatic zoom and a soap opera soundtrack racked up over 200,000 views in 3 days. I captioned it, "Karen says cut the grass. I hired specialists." By this point, the goats had eaten their way through most of the yard and had even started clearing out some stubborn weeds I'd ignored for years. My lawn had never looked better, and I hadn't touched a mower once. Karen, of course, hadn't given up. She began circulating a petition to ban unauthorized livestock, which failed to gather more than 3 signatures, 2 of which I suspect were her own under different names. I could see her across the street some days, watching the goats with the kind of simmering rage usually reserved for people who cut in line at the post office. And the best part? The goats didn't care. They just kept chewing, unbothered, living their best suburban lives. It was a Tuesday evening when the email came through. Special HOA meeting, urgent attendance requested. No subject line had ever sounded more ominous. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 6:30 p.m. in the clubhouse, and it didn't take a genius to figure out what it was about. Karen had finally escalated the situation to the board. I pictured her pacing furiously, binder in hand, rehearsing her speech in the mirror like a general preparing for war. I marked the time on my calendar and decided to bring snacks. And my phone. I had a feeling this was going to be entertaining. The room was more crowded than usual. People showed up with lawn chairs, reusable coffee cups, and in some cases, full-blown excitement on their faces like they were attending opening night of a play. Karen stood near the front, already talking to one of the board members with rapid, intense gestures. I sat near the back, nodded at a few neighbors, and gave a subtle wave to Mrs. Lee, who winked at me in return. Mowgli and Chompers were back home with my roommate, likely asleep under their favorite tree. Karen was first to speak, of course. She launched into a passionate tirade about respecting standards, neighborhood safety, and the slow erosion of suburban values. She held up blown-up photos of the goats like they were mugshots and demanded immediate enforcement of bylaws. Her voice rose as she warned of what would happen if this madness is allowed to continue. Then it was my turn. I stood calmly, hands in my pockets, and explained that the goats were registered as pets with the city, posed no noise issues, and had improved my lawn better than any landscaper I'd hired in years. I even passed around a printout from the municipal code showing the loophole. Goats weren't technically prohibited if they were kept as pets, provided they were quiet, fenced, and cared for properly. The board went silent for a moment. Then, one of the members cleared his throat and said, "Well, we don't have a precedent for this, but it appears you're within your rights." There was a murmur of approval. Another board member added with a chuckle, "Frankly, your lawns never looked better." Karen stood frozen, binder gripped tight, disbelief etched on her face. And just like that, the motion to ban the goats failed. I walked out of that clubhouse to the sound of light applause and someone whispering, "Long live Chompers." A few weeks later, life in the neighborhood settled into a strange, delightful new rhythm. The goats had become a permanent fixture, roaming the backyard like miniature lawn sculptors, occasionally poking their heads through the fence to receive treats from passing kids. What started as a petty rebellion had evolved into something far more entertaining and oddly unifying. People smiled more. Conversations lasted longer. Even the neighborhood group chat, once a wasteland of complaints and lost cat alerts, was now sprinkled with goat memes and updates on Mowgli's yoga sessions. Karen, on the other hand, had gone noticeably quiet. She still stalked around with her binder, still peered through her blinds like a suburban watchtower guard, but the fire was gone. Defeated not by confrontation, but by the overwhelming support of a community that had found joy in a pair of goats and the person crazy enough to bring them home. I'd heard rumors she was trying to get herself elected HOA president next cycle, but even her most loyal gossip partners were now suspiciously absent at her front porch tea hours. Meanwhile, the goats were thriving. Their coats were glossy, their moods cheerful, and their work ethic unmatched. My lawn had never looked better, my stress levels had dropped, and I hadn't touched a mower in over a month. I even found myself sitting outside more, just watching them graze. There was something oddly meditative about it. They didn't worry about bylaws or neighborly politics. They just chewed and existed, perfectly content. I received a postcard in the mail last week. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Karen's. It simply read, "At least get them bells. They sneak up on people." I laughed for a solid minute and pinned it to the fridge. Sometimes I think about how close I came to just giving in, mowing the lawn, apologizing, trying to keep the peace. But there's a particular satisfaction that comes with solving a problem your own way, especially when that solution has horns and a talent for selective chaos. If Karen had just minded her business, I probably would have mowed that lawn eventually. But because she didn't, two goats now rule this tiny slice of suburbia. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.